How in the world are you, Mike D?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Matt.
So, it's Scott Linehan. I didn't see it coming. Mike, your reaction?
Well, I think if you listened to what Coach O had been saying now for a couple of weeks, he was headed in the direction of an NFL coach. And the thing with Scott, and Ed's always talked about this, about I'm looking for a teacher and somebody that can bring to the table something that can add to what we already have offensively. That's what Joe Brady did a year ago. Scott's resume is far different in that he made a meteoric rise of the coaching ranks. When you look at his early record and how he got to be a head coach, I mean, he did it in a real quick fashion. And then, things sort of derailed for him as a head coach. When you're an offensive coordinator, for the most part, and you have an offensive-minded coach, you're doing what he wants you to do offensively. Come on, bottom line. If you didn't do it, then he wouldn't have you in that spot. And that was a Jason Garrett creation with the Cowboys. What Scott brings to the table is, and I think it's what Ed has spoken about quite often, is that this game has dramatically changed offensively in this point. It's all about scoring sevens instead of threes. And he feels, as a defensive-oriented coach, that's the toughest thing to combat. If you have an offensive team that you're up against and they have the ability to score a touchdown and all you can get out of it on your possession is a field goal. I think that's why a big part of why Scott is here. One, he's a very good teacher. He's worked with the pitch and catch game quite often in the National Football League and for a number of years. And secondly, the NFL is looked at as the league. Okay, that's the toughest to score seven when you get in the red zone. Third down possession is so crucial there to convert. And I just think that was the main part of getting Scott here. And I think he feels as though that the coordination between him and Steve Ensminger will go very smoothly. But if you look in college football today, isn't it all about I can put 7 on the board and my defense can maybe hold you to 3 or a punt? And wasn't that the big part of LSU last year?
Mm-hmm.
Even early on when their defense struggled at times, we could get 7s. What you settling for? And match it. If you that good, match it 7 for 7. I think that's a big part of what he wants to continue to do. 2020 will look a little differently, okay? It's got to. It can't be anything like what we saw. That's going to be impossible. And his job is going to be a tough one because, every Yahoo that thinks they can call a play will be after him if it doesn't work out. He ain't no Joe Brady or he should have done this, he should have done that. Those are the same people who a year ago didn't know who Joe Brady was and said it was a bad hire. So I think with Scott, you have an experienced professional coach who understands the short yardage, third down, red zone area of the game that'll work very well with Steve. He's got very good coordination between quarterback, wide receiver, and what that sort of connection leads to. And he's got a bevy of talent at LSU also to work with. So I could see that happening between what Scott would bring and his working relationship with Steve, and why Ed would have a connection with that. Ed knows, I guess you can't say he's the owner, but he's the vice president, Stephen Jones. He coached him at Arkansas. He's got one of the memorable lines about Coach O. He nicknamed him Hip Sled Ed. Listen, Steve didn't know about rules sometimes, and he bent them. And of all people at that time, Ed was sort of in charge of discipline at Arkansas, which he would know a lot about. at that point. And there was one guy who continually broke curfew and would come in late. And Ed would, throw the hammer down. They finally figured out. One of the coaches told him, said, "Look, you know who this guy is?" And he said, "No." He says, "That's Jerry Jones's son." And Ed's comment is, "Well, who's Jerry Jones?" This is pre-Cowboy days, and he had to get explained a little bit that Jerry was the biggest donor at the University of Arkansas, and this was his son he was disciplining at that particular time. And one of Ed's deal was get him on that 8-man sled and kind of ride him around the practice field, which he had to do at times too when he was in college.
Imagine that.
Oh yeah. And so Stephen gave Ed that nickname, Hip Sled Ed, and that has stuck with him. And he's a phone call away. I know him and Ed have a real close relationship with one another from those days. Rod Marinelli, who was on that staff, Ed has spoken at the highest level, has been at clinics with Rod, and so that's connections there. Certainly Randy Moss too. It's easy to get on the phone with Randy to talk to him about their when they worked together. And I think he got some really high compliments about Scott from various people other than the Joneses, other than, say, Marinelli and Moss. So, I you know what? Overall, I like that because he's not calling the plays here. He's brought in for a specific situation. Now, I think what's going to be interesting is I thought Joe really had a good touch on third down plays that he thought could work, and he worked with Steve very well with that. I think that gets underrated today. It was what is Steve's offense, and Joe certainly played a big part into that. But one of the things sort of behind the scenes is Joe's ability to communicate with Steve very well on what would work on those crucial third down plays, red zone plays. And you just saw this offensive explosion that happened at LSU that we may never see at that level again. So while it's a good job for what it pays, man, are you in the crosshairs of everybody now that's going to be critical if it isn't a 45-point effort by LSU offensively. So I knew it would be an NFL coach. Scott's name I had heard had been kicked around into that. And I think one of the things with Ed, he likes the fit. I think he feels as though that relationship will work very well with him and Ensminger, which he told me last year at this point. He thought it would be a great spot because, I looked at he's a 30-year-old coach working with a 60-year-old coach. Sometimes that doesn't work real well.
True.
And sometimes it does. And it worked beautifully last year. I think the big thing to watch is, especially as the season goes along, is the third down situation because now that's Scott's baby. That's his deal now. Third down, red zone, that ability to put sevens up on the board, and it might have to be done a little bit differently than it was a year ago. The pace will stay the same. The look will stay the same. But, Joe's not there, and Justin Jefferson's not there, and Thaddeus Moss is not there, and Clyde's not there, and you're replacing 4 offensive linemen. So you're going to have to tweak it a little bit. And it's one thing that I know Ed has always talked about, and you've heard him, that this is a player-driven program. He will play to the strength of that player or to the strength of the talent on that team. That's why he's moved to a 4-3 alignment. Because right now he's got a lot more defensive linemen than he's got linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he looks at this the same way offensively. When I look at this squad for next year, Jamar Chase is unbelievable, an unbelievable talent. If Terrace Marshall can stay healthy, man, he scares the bejesus out of you. And Trey Palmer is a guy that you're going to be hearing a lot about. If Gilbert is anything close to what we saw him in high school, he's going to be a difference maker. But look at that backfield. Curry, Emery, Tyron Davis-Price. I think they're going to run the football more next year. Just off the surface, wouldn't it make a little sense early on to sort of protect Miles a little bit, to try to be a little bit more of a run-oriented team. I'm not saying they're going to go back to what it was,
Mm-hmm.
but last year they threw the football more than they ran it. And also the use of the backs coming out the backfield. I think also that's a spot where Linehan can help in doing even more of that. And they did it last year quite a bit with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was terrific in catching the football coming out the backfield. But I see that threesome of backs, and early on it may be a situation where, hey, let's run it a little bit more than we did. So, it may be a little bit tilted early toward running it more than throwing it, even though this team is going to be always built the way it is now around throwing the football downfield.
All right, Mike D's with us. Mike, one quick follow-up on Scott Linehan. Do you know if he's long for the college game, or does he see this as an opportunity just to get back into coaching in hopes of getting back to the NFL?
Really, I could care less. Here's my deal about that. If he takes this job and he becomes a coordinator in the NFL, that tells me one thing. He swung the gate pretty hard.
Yeah.
That tells you. So what? If he's last 1 year. This ain't the job. This ain't a civil service job where you can get a lot of benefits at the end of it. You understand what coaching is about. Come on. This ain't a civil service job. And you understand coaches will leave for better opportunities. Maybe they want to work with a certain coach. Maybe they get a chance to go back to the pros. But if he takes this job and he's offered a coordinator's job somewhere else, that means one thing: he did his job at LSU.
Very true.
He did more than his job there. And so, God bless him. Thank you for the year, just like I would with Joe Brady when I see him again. And I would be able to tell him that, of how much he made a difference in 2019. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a good teacher. You're looking for a guy to bring a certain angle that can help your football team. And so I wouldn't have an issue if he leaves after a year. I mean, I don't think anybody would. Well, probably some would. But, I mean, again, I know I wouldn't.
Mike, I want to switch gears. And the Linehan topic, I'm sure we'll talk more about as we get closer to spring ball and all. Taysom Hill this week had some interesting comments with Ian Rappaport of NFL Media. And you saw him, but paraphrasing, he said he would leave New Orleans to be a starter this year. Do you think he's going to get that opportunity in free agency? Will somebody pay Taysom Hill starter money this year?
No, won't happen this year.
So what's realistic then for Taysom in 2020?
That is, everything depends on what happens with Drew, okay? And I think we'll find out real quick. And I've always felt that Drew stringing this, I think if Drew would have retired, he'd have done it by now. I think he'd have made that comment. I'm not going to string this along, but if he retired, God bless him. He's doing it for his own right reasons. And I think with Taysom, if Drew returns, he comes back in a similar role, in that he's a role player on this team, a really good football player. But you would have to see much more sample size of him as a quarterback. And will that happen during the season? Probably not. But I think he would get a tremendous amount of work in the preseason with the ones to get a better look at him. He's not a young quarterback, okay? He's 30 years old, going to be 31 next year. So it's not like all of a sudden, he's going to drink from the fountain of youth. And, again, he understands that his time frame in the NFL is there now. And I understand his comments fully. He did an event with us last summer out in the home area, and, he made it known, I want to be a starting quarterback in the NFL one day. He said, I don't know if it'll be here because Drew might play until he's 50 years old. But he said it, in a somewhat joking manner, which we all knew that, those moments are going to happen. But I'll put it to you this way. If you're a GM, from what you've seen, would you give him money that you would give up a first-round pick in return for him?
No.
Neither would I. So if there's a team out there that's willing to pay him that kind of money now, and I get a first-round pick for a guy that I got off the waiver wire, hey, tag me. I want that. Give it to me. I'll take that first-round pick tomorrow. It would be difficult to lose Taysom. I think he's a very good football player. But if you're projecting him as a starter now, I don't know how you're projecting it. Based off of what you've seen, he's thrown the football very little. In a regular season game, I got one guy, and I sort of worry about him a little bit. I wish I had his number because I'd call him. He keeps sending me a video of the Saints Chargers preseason game and how good Taysom Hill looked. And I'm really concerned about him. I really am because, that's how he's judging Taysom Hill. And listen, all of us would love to see Taysom in the black and gold. And he has got a role, and a significant role in this football team. As a role guy at quarterback, playing in the slot, as a receiver, on special teams. But truthfully, you are just guessing on Taysom as a future NFL starter. I know that's what he wants to do, but again, if you watched him at practice and you see he'll make 3, 4, 5 really good throws, and then a couple of 3 he's sailing, or the ball's hitting in front of the guy. Okay, you're doing that against air. You don't see Drew Brees do that. Even at 40 years old, he's not doing that. It's the consistency of being able to do it. That's what separates the good players from the great players. And Sean Payton is a historian in a lot of ways. He's looked back at this and seen, the Packers have won championships, and it's 100 years who they've won it with. Starr, Favre, Rodgers.
Mm-hmm.
The Chiefs have won it with 2 quarterbacks, Dawson, Mahomes. Dawson's in the Hall of Fame, and Mahomes keeps healthy. He'll shatter everything across the board for a young quarterback from what he's done. You look at the Patriots for their history. Only one quarterback's won them a Super Bowl, and he's won them multiple times. That's Tom Brady. There are exceptions to the rule of might want to say a middle-of-the-road or above-average quarterback winning you the Super Bowl, but I do think that critical position has to be there, the consistency of it over a length of time. And, I think Sean understands that as well as anyone. Now, if you got the mic in front of me, I'll tell you everything great about Taysom. I want him on my team. I don't want him to go anywhere else, so I'll tell you what I want. But look at this offseason. I think it's the most adventurous offseason for veteran quarterbacks in my time frame in covering free agency, in the fact that Tom Brady, Drew Brees, look all the Taysom Hill talk. Just to talk about those 3 alone in the last couple of weeks and what it's registered. Ryan Tannehill is unsigned. What's going to happen with Cam Newton in Carolina? Andy Dalton, where is he going to land? Because he's a starting quarterback in this league, but, he ain't going to stay in Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen to Matt Stafford? And we've talked about this on a number of Monday night shows. If something would happen that Drew would walk away, that's where I'll make my call first. Because I think Matt Stafford in this offense could be a dynamite football player. Now, he's not surrounded by great talent in Detroit on both sides of the football. But does Detroit with the 3rd pick look at this and say, you know what? We want to energize our fan base. We know Cincinnati will pick Joe Burrow. And we're almost certain that the Redskins will pick Chase Young. We could sit there and pick Tua. And Bill Parcells always says this and has that comment, nothing energizes a fan base more than a talented young quarterback. And so you got to look at that particular spot. What happens with Phillip Rivers? Does he retire or does he play again? What's going to happen in Tampa with Jameis Winston? I don't remember another year with that many veteran guys that could be moved around. And I'm not even talking about Carr with the Las Vegas Raiders, who John Gruden has let certain people in the media know he's not happy with him. So, man, you got a lot of different things here kind of flowing, and we ain't even started, the veteran free agency part, and there's still a lot to be written about the 2020 offseason. But I don't remember, Matt, and I've done this for quite some time, another offseason with this much talk about veteran quarterbacks. and where they could land, how they could change the landscape of the NFL when you take a look at it, and guys with significant value at that particular point. So you got a lot of different things that are happening this offseason, and Taysom's part of it, certainly with the Saints. And what happens not only for this year, but are you really looking at him down the road?
Yeah.
As your starting quarterback? And I think that's the big question. I think it's easy to figure this out, that if Drew returns for 2020, Taysom's going to be back, and he's going to have basically the same role as he's had in the last 2 years, maybe expand it a little bit more, but that's going to be his role. He's going to be Drew Brees' backup, and Teddy Bridgewater becomes open, and he becomes another chapter to be written in the free agency part of the world.
Mike, wanted to follow up as we were talking NFL free agency. Vonn Bell also made some comments this week, and we kind of debated what Vonn Bell is worth. The best safeties in the NFL, Tyrann Mathieu, Earl Thomas, Landon Collins, all making $13.5, $14 million a year. And the Saints wouldn't pay Kenny Vaccaro. They swung and missed with Jarvis Byrd. What do they do with Vonn Bell?
Well, one, I know you're not picking the music today, because when I heard Mims singing, I know you ain't picking that one, brother.
I don't know, Mike. You should have been watching, man. I was singing "This is why I'm hot" in the break, man. Coming out, I was.
Yeah.
I was jiving on Mike. You know, I know some of that stuff now. Come on, man.
I know you know some of it, but I was just messing with you.
It sounded like you were really just dropping your knowledge there, increasing your street cred when it comes to music.
Yeah, I know a little bit.
I know you know. See, what's always funny whenever I let you spin a little on it, man. People are like, "Damn, Mike D, really?" I'm like, "Yeah, Mike D, for real."
I got a neighbor of mine who man, his deal is, listen, let's get on some kind of Jeopardy deal, and let's got money on the fact that you can guess these artists and the names of the song.
Okay.
And it can be and he said, "Listen, I'm just telling you, we can do pretty good with that." I said, "Okay, well, one day when my mind's right, we'll be able to do just that."
All right, stump Mike D. We are doing a segment sometime in this offseason.
I'll do it.
Stump Mike D. We'll do it. No,
I'll do it.
Oh, Mike, better idea. What if every week? Now I'm just thinking out loud. What if every week we had one song, and it was like before Ask Mike, we play a song. You get like name that tune. You get like 10 seconds of the song, and you got to name the title and artist.
Yeah. Okay. I ain't got an issue with that.
I love this. Okay. All right. Go ahead. Vonn Bell.
Listen, I want Vonn on my football team. I'm not going to pay him $14 million, but I want him on my football team. I think he's one of the best young safeties in this game. He's a playmaker, very physical player. He matches up well in the coverage part of the game. He comes up with turnovers, and he really has come along tremendously well over the past 2 years. So he's somebody that I would want to keep, because I think he's a core player defensively for me. And he also lets me keep Chauncey Gardner-Johnson at that slot position and sort of move around a little bit, kind of part linebacker, part safety, which is in vogue now all over. I don't care if it's college football or the NFL. You see all those guys being moved all around. I think Gardner-Johnson playing that spot is the right position for him. So Vonn coming back is, to me, a big part of what you've tried to do. It's always been that this team has been built around Drew Brees and the offense. Now you've got some pieces now on defense that you want to try to keep, as many of them as you can. Vonn Bell would be one of those type of guys. Again, I don't know what he's looking for financially. If it's $14 million, he's going to get it somewhere else. It's not going to be with the Saints.
Do you think someone will pay him that, Mike? Do you think there's a market for Vonn Bell?
I don't know. Listen, it only takes one.
Yeah.
You're not winning the electoral college here. You're just looking for one team that's willing to cut you that check, and you're on your way. But, man, he's a guy that I want back, because I've seen his progression and how good he is and what he means that from a physical standpoint back there. He's a guy that you see a lot of receivers, they sort of looking around when he's in that area, because he's going to pop you. He's a very physical football player, but he also matches up in the coverage part of the game. So he would, to me, be a core player defensively. I've spent a second-round pick on him. developed him. I want to keep him. Now, again, it all comes down to dough and how much you're willing to spend. And the Saints have always been the type of team, Mickey has told us this different times, has explained it to me about, hey, listen, we want to try to fill as many needs in veteran free agency as we can. And what happens is the scouts and the scouting director, Jeff Ireland, they put a board up. And Mickey and Sean get together, and they put the final board up. It's those two guys. Now, it's based off of the information that they're being given by the scouts and Jeff Ireland, and Terry Fontenot, and that's how they put it all together. But it's down to those two guys to come up with it. And so I think this offseason, signing Vonn Bell, to me, would be a priority for this football team, just because I think he means that much to you. And you're going to have to win a little bit differently. You're going to have to do it a little bit differently. And, I don't care if it's 2020, 21, 22. And your defense has to not give up the big plays. And I think Vonn is a big part of that. And so I would do what I had to do to keep him. But again, if this money figure gets to $13.5, $14 million, they're not going to be able to afford that. And would there be a team out there? Man, I think in the safety world, probably not. So it would certainly put you in that category that you may be able to bring him back. And again, I'll repeat this. I think he's a core player defensively for this team to return.
He's on Twitter at Mike Detillier. Mike, I also saw, this was, I guess, part of the Saints News Network. You put out a mock draft. And I was, Mike, admittedly, a little surprised. I know you don't typically do mock drafts. We'll see it in your draft guide. If you would, a few thoughts on what you have the Saints doing, because you have them going linebacker with Kenneth Murray out of Oklahoma. Maybe a little thought behind your pick there.
If I put up what I have today, Saints-wise, talent, and what positions I need to get better. Okay, I look, they've got a lot of young talent at wide receiver, but none of them have blossomed, with the exception of Michael Thomas, who's a star. But I flip it to defense, and I say, okay, Demario Davis, he's an all-pro guy. And then what I've got surrounding him, Alex Anzalone has been hurt almost every year he's been here. He's had multiple surgeries. I've got A.J. Klein, who's going to be a free agent. Craig Robertson up in age. Kiko Alonso coming off another knee injury. Wouldn't that look to you to be an area where you got to upgrade at that linebacker position?
Sure.
And it's becoming more and more priority for teams, guys that can not only run the field but can cover. Guys that not only can play up front to stop the run, but also be able to match up with a tight end or running back coming out of the backfield. This is why people like Murray, and it's why you've seen the ascent of Patrick Queen, because they have that ability to do it. There aren't a lot of those type of guys out there athletically that can match up. I look at Murray, and I remember in the days leading up to the LSU-Oklahoma game, and speaking to Coach O, and he was like, man, there's one guy on every play he's involved. It was Murray on defense for him. Now, you just see he could play as a middle linebacker. He could play as a weak side guy. I mean, he can match up with the running backs downfield. You see his ability to flow, get to the ball carrier. This is as deep a wide receiver group as I have ever done. If it's not, it's in the 2 spot. Man, you got a lot of receivers out there. You don't have a lot of guys like Murray that can cover and can run the field. And so it came down to that for me. Again, not knowing what you'll lose in free agency or what you'll be looking for. 'Cause I think they're going to go out and get a veteran offensive guard to replace Andrus Peat. I think the money value there will be a little bit too rich. And the fact that he can play some left tackle, I think, is certainly a big plus for him. So you'll have to go out and get a veteran offensive guard, and a guy that's a starter, not a guy that's a backup. You're talking about starter at that position. I think that linebacker is going to come as a huge play for this football team. And when you look at that roster and you see that injury list and you see that age part of it too, and man, Davis is tremendous, but he's not a young man anymore. I'm looking for a guy that I can have as a stellar player that may fall to you at that point, because I think there'll be a run on offensive tackles. I think there'll be a bit of a run certainly at wide receiver. Quarterbacks always, they trump everything.
Right.
Again, pass rushers. And it may push that linebacker to you. And I can get a receiver closer in the third round to the guy that I could get in round one in comparison to a linebacker. I just think it's an area this football team is going to have to pay a lot of attention to in the offseason, not just draft-wise, but also veteran free agency-wise, because of injuries, age, and also possible defections.
Okay, wrapping up hour number 2. Glad you're hanging out with us. You know the drill. Final segment with Mike Detillier. Your questions only. Let's get to it. First, out the shoot. Here's one from Travis Prejean on Twitter. Mike, ask Mike, what if Jordan Love is sitting there at 24? Will Sean Payton have thoughts on him?
I'm sure he would. I've seen enough of Jordan. The one thing with it is, one, I don't think he'll be there at 24.
Okay.
I think he'll be off the board by then. But he's an intriguing player, but he has one trait that drives you up the wall, and that he's very erratic throwing the football. You watch him, again, he'll make 4 or 5 really good throws, and then he's sailing them. And in big games, he wasn't surrounded by great talent, but he didn't play real well either. I think he's a developmental guy that some team, if it's Indianapolis or whoever, would take and have a year to kind of sit and learn. Now, would that make sense for Sean? Possibly so. But one, I don't think he'll be there, and I certainly think he would have an interest in him. And he's such an impressive young guy. But you're going to have to fight that erratic nature with him. That is part of his game from high school into his college days.
Mike, a lot of questions about Patrick Queen. How high you think he's drafted? Would the Saints take him at 24? Thoughts there?
Listen, he's made a meteoric rise. I think that Mike Mayock certainly let it be known that he has a lot of interest in him. And that's why he made the run this quickly. I think, Mike is never one to be shy about telling you he likes a player, and I think he's earned that. You think about 2 years ago or a year ago, would we be talking about Patrick Queen as a first-round pick? No. No, it was Devin, but we could see it with Devin, okay?
Right.
But we didn't see that right away with Queen. But he fits what the NFL wants, and that is the fact that he can run east-west. He's a good open field tackler, and he can drop in coverage. Those guys are gold. They like pass rushers today in the NFL, and he could well see himself going round one. Now, again, you'll have to go back to the tape, but, boy, is the combine going to be big for him. I think that is going to be a pretty good measuring stick, but you got to go back to see how well he's played. And late in the year, man, he was making a ton of plays for LSU.
Ask Mike, is there a veteran guard you'd like to see the Saints go after to replace Pete?
Yeah, I think Joe Tunney, who's with the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
He's only given up one quarterback sack the last 2 years. Real sharp guy. The Saints and the Patriots have practiced against each other. They know each other's personnel pretty good. And, he understands the game. He's a good leverage player. So I think Joe Tunney's a guy that he'll cost you money now, because I think there'll be a number of teams interested in him. But I think he's a guy that the Saints may be eyeing. And I think he's one of the guys that they go for quickly, because this is a team that normally is a quick strike with one guy or maybe a second, and then they wait a little while to see the market sort of slow down.
A couple of minutes left, Mike. See if we get a couple more questions. Here's one from Chris Savage, who says, Mike, if Tua was never hurt, would he be a higher pro prospect than Burrow?
Yeah. I don't think there's any question about it. But again, and I heard Bucky Brooks' comments, but Bucky's been in that room before. Okay, when you're discussing putting up that board, medicals come into play. So I get that he might like Tua,
right,
and he thinks he's a better prospect. But sell me that if I'm the owner. Sell me that, okay? And he's going to be a top 3, 4, 5 pick. And there's no question about it. And I never felt he would fall far. Other guys today that are swinging that flag, they were the same guys that told you his career is over with. His career is over with. Now all of a sudden they're telling you he's the best player in the draft. But to answer the question, if he was healthy, did not have the hip injury, I think that you would have a divided part here between him and Joe Burrow, and I think more teams probably putting Tua ahead of Joe. But that injury part plays such a huge part into it that, today, how you can rank him ahead of Burrow, I just shake my head, especially coming from a guy who's been in that war room, who's been in those discussions. He understands that's a major part of when you rate a player, his health. And right now, it's still a question mark.
Mike, got about 30 seconds. As for wide receiver for the Saints, draft, free agency, what do you think?
I think they go free agency for a veteran receiver.
Okay.
I think they go for a big receiver in free agency. It's what Sean's wanted. I think he's got a couple young guys he really likes.
He's on Twitter at Mike Detillier, saintsreport.com, MikeDetillier.com. Go order your M&D draft report. Do it right now at MikeDetillier.com. You're the man, Mike D. We appreciate you. We'll talk next week.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Matthew.